with disability in Asian Canadian communities. My name is Dr. Elena Caprioni. I'm the program director of the Asian Business and Management program at York University. And I'm Italian Canadian. I have red hair and very curly, and I'm wearing a green shirt. It's my pleasure to be with all of you tonight to launch these amazing initiatives. Before we begin, please note that captions and transcripts are available for this session, and you can access them by clicking the relevant options on your screen under the video. And if you're using transcripts, please remember to save them before we close the meeting. Although we're not in the same location, we must recognize that. Gina, is everything okay with the screen? Okay, I'm back. So although we're not in the same location, because I'm sure there are people from all over Canada tonight here, we must recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area known as Caronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It's now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. And we acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississauga of the Credit First Nations. And these territory subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. All right, so now the panel that we're going to launch tonight is part of a bigger series designed to raise awareness, reduce stigma, and really create inclusion for people with disability in the Asian Canadian community. Yesterday, we actually launched the first panel, and that was in person. It was focused on education and inclusive learning for Asian Canadian communities. And in the coming days, we will cover different topics, such as understanding the cultural context of disability in these communities, as well as employment and community support. Today's event is titled Raceness, Awareness and Understanding of Disability in Asian Canadian Communities. And we will begin our session led by distinguished guest speaker, Rabia Kader, which includes an overview of the Accessibility Canada Act and its implication for Asian Canadian communities, and also the progress being made in accessibility and inclusion. After this, we'll have a panel discussion led by Professor Farah Ahmed, a professor of the School of Health Policy and Management at the Faculty of Health at York University. And then this session really will explore the diverse experiences of individuals with disability with Asian Canadian communities, focusing on how historical and cultural factors shape attitude, access to care, and support. So that's the agenda of the day. But before we begin, let's go over a few housekeeping rules. We prepared a slide, an easy slide with all different housekeeping rules that we want to remind you. I hope that these will be helpful. As I mentioned before, if you wish, you can click on the captions. You can turn on or turn off them. And then also the transcripts are available. Remember, this is very important to save the transcripts before we end the session. The session will be recorded, and at the end of this event, the session and the transcripts will be available on the website of North Star Special Needs Society. Now, during the during the event, if you want to ask questions, feel free to do so. Use the chat for questions, for comments. We're going to monitor them, and then we're going to pick up a few of these questions during the Q&A session. And if it's too difficult to type, feel free to unmute yourself and speak during the Q&A session, not while we are having the panel or the session. Rabia. Now then, the other things are trying to be muted during the chat to avoid background noise. Also very important, since the session is recorded, if you want to change your name, please do so. In order to change your name, you have to click with the right click on your name on Zoom, and then you can write whatever you wish. Anonymous or just create a new name for the day. Very important, please be respectful, and let's have a very constructive conversation. Also, take note of the last line so if you have any technical issue, please contact Gina Kwan, our research assistant, and write down her email, abmp@yourq.ca. Write it down, and then Gina now is going to add it also on the chat. Just in case you have technical issue, feel free to contact her right away. Does it sound good? Okay, super. So now, before we start, we want to know our audience and also what you know about this special topic. So we prepare a very quick poll that is going to appear right now on your screen. And then I'm going also to read it aloud. I appreciate if you can take a few minutes to fill in the poll so we have a better idea of our audience, and then we can customize our conversation in a better way. Okay, so the first question is, what best describes your role or perspective in attending this panel, or how to identify yourself, right? So you can choose person with disability, family member or friend, educator or school professional, employer or workplace leader, health or social service provider, community leader or ally, policymaker or government staff, general interest, student, researcher. If you don't identify with any of these, feel free to add the way how you want to identify yourself in the chat. Okay, so the second question is, how familiar are you with the structural and cultural challenges faced by Asian Canadians with disabilities? And you can reply from 0 to 5. 0 means not at all, and 5 means very much. And I'm happy to see that majority of people are at number 4. Okay, and the last question is, how familiar are you with the Accessible Canada Act and its impact on Asian Canadian communities? Again, here you can reply from 0 to 5. 5 is very much, and then 0 is not at all. So Fan Meow Man is asking that cannot see the second and third questions. They're all together. Just scroll down. Okay, so what we can see is here that majority of people joining tonight are family member or friends. And then we have a few educators, a few individuals with disability, a few people from the health sector, others are community leader, and also employers. and also a lot of students. And okay, and so I think we have a very various group. I can end the poll. Can I, Gina? Okay. And then if you want, can you please share the result in the chat?
Sure, I'm sharing the.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now that we did all of the housekeeping rules and reminded everybody what's the agenda of the day, I think that we can start. And I'm very delighted to introduce our distinguished guest speaker, Rabia Kader. Rabia is a passionate advocate for equity and justice for persons with disabilities, women, and diverse communities. She covered a lot of different acts. She has a lot of different roles, including the director on the Accessibility Standards Canada Board and a commissioner on the Ontario Human Rights Commission. She's also the National Director of Disability Without Poverty and a member of the Minister Disability Advisory Group. And as the founder of Race and Disability Canada, Rabia also serves on the board of the Muslim Council of Peel and the Federation of Muslim Women. Okay, so please join me in welcoming Rabia tonight for a wonderful session on the Canada Accessibility Act. Thanks, Rabia.
Thank you very much. My name is Rabia Kader. I have a one-liner that I describe myself with, which is a little twist on the formal bio. As I said, my name is Rabia Kader. I'm a hyphen with many hijabs or hats. So I am a brown-skinned, visibly Muslim woman because I wear a hijab, and today it's, I think, blue, and wearing a black top today. I'm talking to you from Mississauga, Ontario, the traditional territories most recently of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, to whom I'm eternally grateful for the fact that I can live and thrive here. We often forget to thank our first peoples, although we are settlers and occupants, or some of us are colonized who continued to go on this journey of the colonizer to other lands and settle. But there's no place that I call home more than the street that I've lived on for, almost 90% of my life. So back to my one-liner, I say I'm a hyphen with many hijabs. I am a Muslim, Punjabi, Pakistani, Canadian woman, wife, mother, daughter of aging parents, sibling of individuals with intellectual disabilities and other disabilities, including complex needs, an advocate, an activist, a social entrepreneur, a systems disruptor, and I happen to have a disability. I'm blind. And this is a result of a genetic condition that I've had since I was born. So I've never seen perfect. I've always, faked it a lot, pretended to see. And, over time, by the time I was in my mid-30s, the world became very foggy and gray. So I really don't see. It's not black and white. It's not, spotty. It's just invisible. It's just this sort of haze or fog that's colorless at this point. The views and opinions I'm expressing in our time together here are the views and opinions of me and me alone, and not anybody affiliated with me, not my family, not my husband, not my children, not the organizations that I lead, not the titles that I've held in the past, not any other public role that I serve in. So they are very personal opinions based on my lived experience. So I'm going to do a little context setting before I tackle where we are today in a Canadian context around the law and addressing accessibility. So once upon a time, about a whole century ago, we used to simply institutionalize people. we used to lock up disabled people. Not to make a comparison and minimize the pain of our Indigenous brothers and sisters in any way, but they were confined to residential schools and reserves, and the atrocities that this nation committed against our Indigenous peoples are deep and painful. Disabled people experienced a little bit of that too. Disabled people were institutionalized, particularly people with intellectual disabilities or significant learning disabilities or mental illness. Most of them never saw the light of day. Now, along the way, at some point, we had our eugenics policies and sterilization laws. We didn't feel that disabled people should reproduce, especially people who had intellectual disabilities. So they were forcibly sterilized. And prior to World War II, the ultimate committer of genocide in the previous century, Adolf Hitler, even studied what Canada did as he worked to perfect his technology to exterminate 6 million Jews. And he first experimented on other minorities, and in particular, 200,000 disabled people, the victims of a Holocaust before the bigger extent of the Holocaust became prevalent. So disabled people throughout history have been neglected, abandoned, abused, victimized, isolated, and so on and so forth. So out of World War II and the Holocaust, when we said never again, came a new consciousness of human rights. And the world came together, and the United Nations put out the Universal Declaration on Human Rights over 75 years ago. People became more and more conscious of how we were caring for or not caring for or violating the rights of people who were marginalized, who were socially disadvantaged, who were isolated, who were perhaps disabled. In Ontario, we finally pulled together all our human rights bills together under the Ontario Human Rights Code in 1962. Now, visible minorities marched and demanded their rights, especially, the movement south of the border around Black people, the civil rights movement, women's rights, women demanded their rights. And slowly, parents, families, and individuals with disabilities said, wait a minute, they too have the right to live in the community, and particularly families of people with intellectual disabilities said, disabled people, we don't want to put our family members in institutions. We don't want them locked away. We want them to live with us or live near us with the supports they need. So thus began the community living movement and also the independent living movement in the 70s. In 1982, Canada tabled its new constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. There was no mention of disabled people in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. A lot of advocacy happened, including advocacy from disabled people, and particularly then very young Mr. David Lepofsky, a blind lawyer who often makes headlines today, critiquing government of its laws and its programs and accessibility overall in the province and in the country. pushed and made sure that policymakers heard the fact that they could not ignore disabled people in the 80s. So finally, the equality provisions of the charter included discrimination to be prohibited on the grounds of physical and mental disability. And the Human Rights Code also aligned with that. The fight continued. And the Harris government in the early 90s introduced the Ontarians with Disabilities Act at some point, not in the early 90s, much later. Sorry. In 2001. That's how long it took. It took another couple of decades to get another law on the books to advance disability rights. And then in 2005 came a stronger piece of legislation known as the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. Well, that was just for Ontario. What about the rest of the country? The work continued. Disabled people kept pushing hard. And eventually in 2019 came the Accessible Canada Act. Canada also signed on to the optional protocol and ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Again, there's a covenant on social, cultural, and economic rights. And there are the Millennial Development Goals globally that also look at disability rights under the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, or the CRPD. So here we are, we have a lot of law, and we still don't have enough accessibility. So still today, we have laws. So the movements, let me go back to, the independent living movement, the community living movement. These were movements of privilege. These movements did not reflect my reality or the reality of my family and many other families of racialized people with disabilities. Intersectionality wasn't understood. We at the grassroots level, organizations like Ethno-Racial People with Disabilities Coalition of Ontario and the Organization of Canadian Tamils with Disabilities emerged in the mid-90s and started to talk about this whole thing called race and disability. Well, they were grassroots, had very little access to resources, did some good work, started the conversation, but the conversation became more trendy as academia started to use the word intersectionality, which basically means that we have layers of barriers. So remember when I introduced myself, I said I am a Muslim, Punjabi, Pakistani, Canadian woman, wife, mother, daughter of aging parents, yada, 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 and I happen to have a disability. I'm blind. Well, that's the whole package deal. That makes me a whole human being. I am not just a disabled person. And historically, our laws have just looked at us as the disabled person. Our service providers have looked at us just as the disabled person. They have not taken the entirety of who we are into account. And our systems and structures have been created by the dominant culture. The average white middle-class person with a disability, often male, or a parent, mother or father, who have advocated for certain things and have had certain advantages in the system. Many of us have not had those advantages, so we've had to fight hard for what we need, and our needs still fall through the cracks. And many of the ways that programs and services are designed don't meet our needs. We run into all kinds of barriers, from basic in-home services like attendant care, for example, or personal support workers coming into your house, they don't take into account that people live in intergenerational households often in Asian cultures. They don't often consider that, the mother's the caregiver, but she's also the primary person who's taking care of all kinds of responsibilities. And if she's the caregiver of a person with a disability, just going in and doing one load of whites that belong to that person with a disability, like doing laundry just for that one person, one load, doesn't alleviate responsibility for the caregiver, doesn't provide enough relief or respite to the caregiver. It shouldn't be that, we just do that one individual. That individual is a part of a household. So if we just simply do one full load of laundry, then we have relieved the caregiver of one little task instead of, just looking at the disabled person. We have to look at the person with a disability within their household and who they are and who is supporting them and providing care for them. So it's a lame example that I can, elaborate on further later, but I hope you understand what I mean when I say services are designed in a certain way that don't necessarily fit with many Eastern and Southern cultures and familial households and expectations in terms of the role that we each play in our household. So, do we face barriers? Yes, we do. Is there more work to do? Yes, there is. Who's doing that work? Oftentimes able-bodied people. The legislation, and I know that we are, supported by academia, and there's wonderful academic work that happens at York University, and I have, a master's in critical disability studies from York University, in fact, which I'm very appreciative of. The reality remains, though, the laws on the books have created a lot of opportunity, and often that opportunity is for able-bodied consultants and academics to note and talk about barriers and the impact of legislation and programs and services. It's often not led by disabled people, although the law may contain provisions for services that you buy, procurement guidelines that, you have to address accessibility barriers in those procurement guidelines. You have to have a person with a disability. In reality, what's happening is consulting teams are bringing in a person with a disability as a token. I often find myself as a token. I sit on the minister's advisory group. I'm the only racialized woman with a disability on that group. Everybody else is white, disabled or non-disabled, but white. So the fact remains that we, as people with disabilities coming from Eastern and Southern cultures, and particularly Asian communities, have a rich history, heritage, culture. We carry that culture with us that brings certain expectations that are pluses and that are minuses when it comes to our lived reality of disability within a Canadian context. And there's a lot of work to be done around it. So, that's my little history lesson around legislation and some of the current stuff. A little bit more about me. So, I was born in a little village in Pakistan, in Punjab, about 2 hours away from Islamabad. I have a hereditary condition. I have cousins with the same eye condition. I had an uncle with the same eye condition. So my late uncle, when he was young, went to school. When he was in about grade 5, my grandmother was summoned to the headmaster's office, the principal's office at the school, and was told, take your son home because his vision will get worse the more he struggles to read. Well, that wasn't necessarily discrimination, you see. There was no electricity. There was no understanding of the eye condition. The classroom was dim and dull. He struggled. And with the best of intentions, his teachers and principal felt that his vision will get worse the more he struggles. So he was sent home kicking and screaming, not wanting to leave school. Now, if I grew up in that village, I know my reality as a woman. Like if that was my uncle's experience, who was a man, imagine me as a woman. I would be washing somebody's dishes for my next meal. So I always say, thank God I grew up in Canada. Thank God I grew up in Canada because Canada is the best and I have the right to voice for more and make it better. I'm not saying perfect. I never said perfect. I said from best to better. And I have those rights because of the laws of the land. My journey wasn't perfect. Being that firstborn child of an immigrant family, my mother did not have access to education. When we came here, I spent a lot of time watching television, so I perfected the language. The hospital that I was assessed at, I was fitted for the perfect glasses, and that was my family's goal: get her glasses. There has to be treatment in the West, right? There has to be something medically that can be done. So glasses it was. The hospital was thrilled to see a live specimen of me with my eye condition because they had only read about it in the books, and there were so few of us in North America. There's maybe a couple of thousand of us now. So nobody asked if I was in school. My parents brought their lived experience, and they didn't want to hurt me in any way. They didn't want me to go to school and have my heart broken the way my uncle's heart was broken. Nobody asked them, is Rabia in school? So time went by. I spent 2 or 3 or 4 years of my life in this country, about 3 and 3.5, watching a lot of television. And probably shows that were a little more mature than I should be watching. Today, parents are very careful about what their kids watch. But I watched Happy Days and the Dick Van Dyke Show and I Love Lucy and Gilligan's Island, and alongside, Price is Right and Sesame Street and Mr. Dress Up and, Romper Room, all that stuff, Polka Dot Door. I watched all of that. And I learned my alphabet. I learned the language. One day, somebody said to my dad, this is Canada. You need to take her to school. So my dad took me to the local school in the dead of winter. And what did he tell the principal? Well, we're Muslim, we eat halal, and she wears glasses and can't see that well. That was it. My father didn't understand that my vision loss was so significant that it could be categorized in a way that I would get accommodations. And there you go. I was assessed, mislabeled, and misplaced. It took a couple of years for a teacher to figure out it wasn't that I had a learning difficulty. I actually had vision loss that impacted my abilities to read and write. Once I saw things clearly or had them given to me in an accessible way, back then it just meant a real black marker on very white paper written out. I did fine. I aced things. They couldn't figure out how to accommodate me in art class or gym class. People felt I should have a lesser course load because obviously it was harder for me to get my work done. I was a slow reader. So they took me out of French. Bad mistake of public school because I would have loved to continue with French. Every time I go to Quebec, I regret the fact that I cannot parlez-vous français. Fast forward, I learned to advocate for myself. My parents didn't know how to advocate for me. They were happy driving me to school, making sure I had everything I had, that I was safe. They didn't know what went on in school. I took care of myself at school. I eventually learned how to advocate for myself. With little trials and triumphs, I got through. I got a university degree, an undergrad from the University of Toronto. And so, when I say Canada is the best and I have the right to voice for more and make it even better, I had access to education. And that access to education gave me access to jobs, a career, employment opportunity. That gave me access to community and family. So today, I serve in all these roles and run all these organizations and have a brand out there speaking to media, to television, to politicians in many different spaces and places on many different issues. I mean, I even ran for city council in Mississauga to prove a point. So I'm only able to do that because I had access to education that opened up all these opportunities. And I did get married along the way and have 4 adult able-bodied kids and married an able-bodied man, which often is also questioned by many communities. And as a racialized woman with a disability, not only do I face barriers in the dominant culture, but I face barriers within the various communities that I associate with. So I face barriers within the mosque, within the Muslim community. I face barriers within South Asian communities as a person with a disability, as a woman. And in the mainstream, I face barriers because I am racialized, I am Muslim, I am a woman, and I have a disability. So has the law changed things? It has changed some things, but there's a lot more work to do. Rights are advanced on the books alone unless people take responsibility to ensure that they are observed. And if they're not observed and honored, we stand up and demand that they are. So yes, we are in a much better place than we were a century ago. But here we are today, where disabled people still face tremendous abuse, violence, and victimization around the world. And they are often forgotten when it comes to disasters like the pandemic. Disabled people were the last ones to be thought about. When it comes to war and genocide, disabled people are its greatest victims and often not talked about. So we are seeing mass disablement happening around us, but that's not what anybody's talking about or concerned about. So these are the best of times to live with a disability, but they are the worst of times to live with a disability. Technology has made huge advances, and that's why I'm able to connect and converse independently in this space with you. But technology is constantly evolving and creating new barriers for us, unless every one of us makes sure that the rights of people with disabilities are respected, that the laws enacted are in fact made effective. So if we don't take responsibility, there is no change just because we have rights. And when I say we, it's us disabled people and it's our families and our allies. And we have to help each other as racialized communities to be able to truly address some of our needs. And that's why we come up with, organizations that serve specific communities, because we're not being served in the mainstream. So please feel free to ask any questions, make any comments, be critical. Anything you don't like I'm saying, please let me know. I'd love to know who you are out there listening. If you don't have a comment or question, just throw in the chat if you have a disability or if you have a family member with a disability and what city you're in. How am I doing for time, Elena?
Great. It's 7:44. You're doing great. And then the alarm clock worked.
It did. Gave me a 5-minute warning.
That's right. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Thank you for sharing your story. That's very important, and then I'm sure that a lot of people also resonate to that story, and you can like you'll be a role model for a lot of the individuals who are listening or for their family members, and thanks for explaining also how the Accessibility Act work and what's in place, and then I was fascinated by the fact that you said that when you sit in this board, then you are the only person with disability who is also Asian. So maybe like my question is that when we talk about more works need to be done, do you mean that also like people from the Asian Canadian community should stood up more and be more vocal and discuss more? Is that what you mean?
That's one aspect of it. So, for example, when I have a brother with an intellectual disability. He's supported in mainstream environments, but he's supported as a disabled person. His culture, his religious background, the traditions we observed in our household, the things he was used to, are not present in that environment for him. Also, people with intellectual disability, they don't choose who they live with. They're forced to live with people because they're assessed based on the medical diagnosis, the behaviors, the blah blah blah, which all isn't necessarily aligned with the intent of the law or even the letter of the law. It's the way systems were designed. So there's a lot of change that we need to make happen in order to make these programs and services and supports work today for diverse communities. And, in my case, I said, I'm going to take my lived experience and I'm going to apply it in ways to accommodate younger families who are going through the same journey as my family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm listening to the questions. Absolutely. What happens to them when they're 21? I lived through that reality and I created networks of families, brought groups together to problem solve ourselves. We had to do that because the system wasn't. As we move forward, the system is going to serve less and less because they don't want to spend more. When times get tough for able-bodied people, the system gets tougher on vulnerable people, unfortunately, unless we raise our voices. Look at what's happening south of the border. The first attack was on, air traffic controllers who might have disabilities were being blamed for plane crashes. That just tells you how people in power can further marginalize disabled people. So today we're at a pivotal point. There have been models for employment opportunities and supports for people with disabilities that aren't working anymore. We need new ideas, new energy, and that's where diverse communities come in. That's where Asian Canadians come in. Many of us who have migrated over a decade, 2 decades, 4 decades, left things behind in a certain way. Well, there are best practices emerging in those places and in those places too. It's not all negative that Canada's the haven and over there was really, really bad. We know the challenges, but there are new opportunities being created that we must also research and learn from and see how we can bring to implement here.
There are a couple questions. So you want me to go ahead with the questions?
Yes, please. I
Yeah.
just answered one of them because it
Yes.
popped up the
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah, there is another question from Xin Wan, and they're asking, what are the main challenges today in Canada in relation to equality and protection of the rights of the person with disability?
Access to employment is again huge for people with disabilities. People with disabilities are the most unemployed or underemployed population in this country. Disabled people today living in poverty, living on provincial income supports programs, live well below the poverty line. If you look up disabilitywithoutpoverty.ca, you'll see what I'm talking about. There are 27% of the population identifies as living with having a disability. And out of that population, roughly 1 in 4 live in poverty, deep poverty, often $1,000 below the poverty line, because that's how far behind provincial benefits programs are. So for example, 50% of food bank users are disabled people. Out of every 10 people living in poverty, 4 are disabled. This is huge. This is huge. Although we have laws, we don't have access. So people with disabilities still continue to not enjoy fully the benefits of our society. They are not thriving. And in order to thrive, we need to support their advocacy efforts. And we need to look at existing programs and services and demand that they evolve to create new opportunities for people with disabilities, so that they're truly equal citizens in this society. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you, Rabia. We also have another question. It's from Betsy. She's asking she's a 2 autistic kids mom here. She has concern that children are having support at school. What if they're going out of school? Who support our kids?
Well, and that's a problem that I lived through. So when my brothers turned 21, I had 2 brothers with intellectual disabilities. One of them died at the end of 2020, and the other one lives in a group home. My parents are in their 80s. So in the 90s, my brother is 50 years old now. So, I'm talking about, almost 30 years ago. So my brothers were the sandwich generation between deinstitutionalization and the system becoming completely community based. So they didn't get the supports and services they needed. And when they were leaving the school system, there was nothing for them. I actually talked to the system. I got nothing. And I said, do I have to create something? They said, yeah, you may have to create something. And if you look at some of the history, many of the service agencies, well, the main one I can give you an example is RENA Foundation. RENA Services was established by the Jewish community in the 70s. And it was established by families who were concerned about the care of their children, and were concerned about not only the physical care, but also the emotional and spiritual care of their children. So they established that agency in Thornhill, and it's massive today. So you have to connect with other families and share issues and concerns, and find voice together. Unfortunately, once people leave the school system, it's challenging to get them into the right supports and services. This continuity of support is really difficult to coordinate. I actually, again, out of my brother's lived experience, I wasn't able to create opportunities for them, although I tried to bring parents together to do that. Eventually, I set up an agency that supports a whole bunch of other families from within the Muslim community and others beyond. But we're not a transfer payment agency. We're a private charity. We would love to be funded by government, but government doesn't easily bring people on board. We rely on donations and grants and contributions from our community. And we run programs and services that are culturally sensitive, that teach life skills similar to the skills that people were exposed to at home, that carry out celebrations and traditions that are familiar to them, and have a lot of activity for families to also connect and build those relationships and ask those questions and talk about taboo topics that otherwise they might not be comfortable talking about in a mainstream environment with agencies.
Thank you. I think you replied to Betty's question. Thanks for the details. And there is one more question from Lu Wang. They're asking, so far, how do you think of the institutionalization process in Ontario as part of the developmental services reform?
All I have to say is COVID reinstitutionalized people in those very agencies. So has deinstitutionalized happened? Yes, we shut down those big institutions, but again, existing agencies move toward reinstitutionalization with COVID, and I'm afraid that things are going to get worse before they get better. We are not truly embracing the principles of social inclusion, and we're really lagging on what needs to happen. These agencies get big bucks and do what they have to do. The bureaucracy is huge, and people are not having their needs met the way they should. People, especially in group homes today, I see so many complaints from parents. But we don't have a choice. There's a lot of fear on part of parents to advocate, but I think there's power in numbers. We need to come together to solve problems.
That's right. And then I think that with that, we should remind everybody that to be connected, to not to be silent. Yesterday we talked a lot about how a lot of people try to hide disability, how to keep everything in the family, how not and kind of hide it from everybody. But I think that yesterday the message, today the message is very similar. Like, let's be together, let's talk more, and let's vocalize more the challenges that there are, and also try to work for a better future in this sense.
Betty is absolutely right. It's a lifetime, and you need a lot of community around you. So yes, come out and find other families, make friends, build relationships. That's the only way to help support your kids to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabia. Thank you very much. We do have one last question before we move to the panel. That's from Professor Farah Ahmad. And she's asking, what are some funding challenges for adult care programs and way to move forward?
Well, again, government is not taking on new organizations that are trying to address need. Existing organizations, existing programs have huge wait lists, quality programs. There's too much bureaucracy in larger organizations that maybe choose into some of the resources. It's time for reform. Nothing can stay the same forever. There's no best practice forever that is stagnant. It needs to evolve. So there's a shortage of funding. You have to know how to advocate to get more. And really with the present government, it's really about coming together and putting that pressure on politically to have any hope of having adequate funding. Programs and services are way underfunded, but that underfunding argument doesn't just work for me when it comes to large scale agencies. We really need to kind of deconstruct and reconstruct the existing models of service, in my opinion.
That's right. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. Thank you, Rabia. Thank you very much for spending for allocating time to your busy schedule. I know this is a busy week because it's the National Accessibility Week and there are a lot of events. So I appreciate your time to share with us, and I hope that each one will end this session by knowing a little bit more. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to one of the comments, but one person, after you share all the data, says, wow, these data are shocking. And they're shocking for me too. I had no idea about this data that you shared a few minutes ago. All right, and having said that, so now let's move to the panel. Rabia, you're welcome to stay with us. And if you would like to say any few words before we move to the panel.
I'm just saying thank you very much again for having me. I really appreciate it. Anybody's welcome to reach out to me. I'm always accessible and available. If you're in the Mississauga area, if you have people with intellectual disabilities, you know, teens or young adults who want to kick around a soccer ball, we're on the Churchill Meadows soccer field behind Applewood School, Stephen Lewis Secondary School at 5 p.m. on Sundays. That's a program we offer just to build community for people and relationships. So reach out, connect, happy to support in any way that I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. So now let's move to our panel where we are going to have a conversation about the role that culture plays and the different kind of stigma that we have within the Asian Canadian community. The panel will be led by Professor Farah Ahmed. Farah is a faculty fellow at the York Center for Asian Research and a full professor at the School of Health Policy and Management, Faculty of Health at York University. She conducts community engaged, mixed method research addressing health inequality at the intersections of immigration, refugee status, gender, and race, and with a focus on mental health and neurodiversity. And then now, so we'll spend the next hour talking with her, and we're going to hear a different story from different panelists. And as I mentioned before, during the panel, feel free to leave your questions, your comments in the chat, and then we'll monitor them. And then at the end, we'll reply to all your questions. Thank you, and please join me again in welcoming Farah Ahmed.
Thank you, Elena, for your introduction, and thank you to Rabia for such a insightful, story about the legislation around disability and how Canada has evolved over time, and still there is a lot more to do, especially with the equity focus. So very, very, grateful to hear from her. With that, I would also like to introduce our panelists today. So we have three members, who would be sharing their experiences of working with Canadian Asian communities during their research work, during their community work. And first, I would like them to introduce themselves. So on my screen, I am seeing Cindy first. So I would like Cindy to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Farah, and thank you very much for Rabia for such a lovely overview of the Accessible Act. So my name is Cindy Jiang, she, her pronouns. I'm a woman of Chinese descent, so Chinese background. I have black hair. Currently that is dyed various shades of blue and purple. I'm wearing a white hoodie with glasses. I've had the privilege of being born in Canada, meaning I'm second generation. However, my family's extended family has been in Canada for over 4 generations, so that's just over 100 years in this country. I also have lived experience with an acquired disability in my teenage years, and I am currently doing my doctoral research in critical disability studies over at York University. And most of my research focuses on East Asian, specifically people of Chinese background, looking at understanding and the conceptualization of mental health and disability across generations, looking at not just first generation, but second, third, et cetera, generations of how our understanding shifts over time.
Okay.
Thanks, Farah.
Wonderful. Thank you. And now we have Dr. Vanessa Wong.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Fong. My pronouns are she, her. I'm currently a postdoc fellow at the University of British Columbia. My research focuses on health services for families of children with disabilities from racialized newcomer backgrounds. And I'm joining you all today from the unceded, traditional, and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, also known as Vancouver. I am a Chinese and Filipino woman with black hair, and I'm wearing a black t-shirt. And I'm really grateful to be here today to connect with you all. So thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Dr. Elaine Kegulata.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's Elaine speaking. I am very excited to be here and to be talking with everyone here today. And thank you so much, Rabia, for starting us off so well. I am a brown-skinned woman. I have black hair, green top. I have special earphones that help me hear better. I understand myself as a disabled person. My deafness is currently ongoing in terms of severity. And I am a research officer with a project called Disability Matters at U of T. I'm also a Shirk postdoc fellow at Queen's University in the Department of Gender Studies and Black Studies. And my work focuses or has focused on deafness, disability, race, and policing. And so how the intersection of deafness, disability, and race has led to the criminalization of disabled people.
Thank you so much. And a little bit about myself. So you heard a little bit from Elena already that I am at York University. And just to describe myself visually for those who are visually impaired, I am a brown color woman and I'm wearing glasses. I have short hair, brown color, and I'm of South Asian Canadian descent. I am first generation immigrant and came maybe more than 3 decades ago. So my pronouns are she and her. My research focuses on access to services, especially for racialized immigrant populations, refugees. Also there is a focus on gender issues, disability, neurodiversity. I use mixed methods, and a lot of my recent work is very, very embedded in the community-based approaches. So that's about myself. I have a couple of questions for the panelists. So first, I would like you to tell us how individuals living with disabilities who also identify as members of the Asian Canadian community experience access to various systems of care. It's a very broad question. You can define the way you wish to define the disability, the system of care. Anyone can start? No turn taking from my side.
Okay, I can start off. Whenever someone says we see such and such pattern in Asian communities, sometimes it gets confusing because Asia is an entire continent with diverse cultures and peoples. So today when I speak about Asian Canadian families, I'm mostly referring to Korean families, which is where most of my research specifically that is relevant today has focused on. So my doctoral research looked at Korean families in British Columbia and their experiences accessing health and social services for their children on the autism spectrum. So when I talk about systems of care, I'm referring to this network of health and social services that support children with disabilities. So things like occupational therapy, speech language therapy, school supports, respite, care coordination. So to answer this question, what I found in my own research was that even though these services are available, families face real challenges accessing them, whether it's due to language barriers, a lack of culturally responsive care, or just the complexity of navigating various systems that all seem to be very siloed and working in their own. It's very complicated to get services. And so for some Asian Canadian families, stigma around disability can be so strong that they may not even want to seek out help in the first place. So families that I spoke to in my research, they talked about how they decided to leave their home in Korea, their friends, family, because they felt so stigmatized because of their child's disability. Or they felt judged just being out in public, being on the bus or going to school. And so the decision to move to Canada was not just about seeking better opportunities for their families, but about finding a place where their child and their family could feel accepted and feel included. But for some of these families, even after arriving to Canada, they described challenges that these didn't disappear. They were just different. So again, things like language barriers, cultural differences, and racism presented new obstacles for these families that I spoke to. And I think a part of where the stigma comes from is because families may have a very narrow or literal definition of disability. So only thinking about physical disabilities and not being aware of invisible disabilities like autism, for example. And so parents might not recognize the potential benefits that could be gained from accessing these supports. So then all of these barriers that I mentioned, they combine and they make things extremely challenging to access services. And then this can lead to delays. And given what we know about early intervention, specifically with autism, this often means that families end up shouldering most of the care themselves, which then puts a lot of stress on parents. And we see a pattern, especially in Asian families, where caregivers, who are often women and mothers, take on significant responsibility, sometimes at the expense of their own health and well-being, and even financial security. So a lot of mothers that I spoke to talked about having to leave work, and then this puts them in precarious employment situations and things like that. So sorry, I was talking for a really long time.
Yeah,
I'll
thank you so
stop
much.
there.
No, that's so insightful. I would like to invite Elaine now to share a few things.
Yes, thank you, Elaine speaking. Yeah, I think to sort of hop on a little bit of what Vanessa shared there about that linear definition of disability that very much, I think, shapes how we even begin to access systems of care to begin with, is a little bit of, I think, my response to the question. So from what I've experienced as a teacher and educator from kindergarten to high school, I guess, and now at the university level, the access that disabled people who are members of the Asian Canadian community, the access that they receive in education as a specific system of care is largely determined by understandings of disability, race, gender, class, and more. So that, again, that linear definition is key in shaping our understanding. So for instance, the access to care that I received in the systems of schooling I attended growing up, that access depended heavily on the teachers, the classmates, and the students I encountered and their understanding of normalcy. So ideas of normalcy, like who and what are considered normal, and therefore like who and what is considered desirable, influence ideas of access. So in turn, that influence touches what we make of disability. And I think when we begin with cultural understandings when we begin with thinking about cultural understandings of disability and how those understandings shape people's decisions, for instance, again, to something that Vanessa just said, to seek a diagnosis of disability to begin with, or not, or let alone the decision to acknowledge the existence of disability. All of that is shaped by those definitions that we bring with us, and whether it's in our community or in our families. And I remember a particular experience in school when I was in grade 1, like many years ago now. My family had recently immigrated to Canada from Bahrain. And in the Filipino community, especially the recently immigrated portion of the community many years ago, seeking a disability diagnosis wasn't something my family wanted, nor did they think to want it. And the reasoning surrounding that, and many Filipino families I knew growing up, was, the reasoning was, who would want to identify as disabled? When to be labeled disabled means to be treated like a problem. And if we had grown up, I think, with a more complex story of disability, a more complex story of race, I think our experience accessing systems of care in a predominantly white neighborhood, and now I'm talking about my experience in Northern Alberta, I think that experience might have been very different. So instead, I learned to think I was a problem. And growing up, I honestly didn't feel proud to be Filipino, nor did I grow up embracing myself as a disabled person. So as a result of this refusal to allow disability and race to exist as mattering to a child beyond something as a problem, I began to sort of hide, and I began to not feel proud of myself. And of course, this shapes how we access. And I'm talking about education specifically, but yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. So powerful and insightful. Thank you. Cindy, would you like to add something?
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa and Elaine, for sharing. So most of my research is related to the experiences and understanding of mental health, so that cultural understanding, and specifically amongst Chinese Canadians. And so I have an acquired disability due to a brain injury. And so growing up, from my experience, access to care was very much situated both formally and informally. So formally, through all of the therapies that I needed to go to relearn how my brain learns and how my brain remembers things. And then also informally within my Chinese immigrant family. And so we've already talked about, and I know that the previous session talked about the stigma of like disability amongst many Asian communities. And so as recent immigrants for my parents, that was something that they had to navigate. And because of the very racist laws in Canadian history, you wouldn't want to disclose that you had a disability, because it also meant that for example, my father's family was never able, like it really prevented immigration and family reunification. And so formally, my access to care was through the various Western physicians, and then informally, at the very beginning, it was an outright refusal of, well, she doesn't look disabled, her brain is fine, we think, so why is she failing? And so, and then from there, my parents went into a lot of traditional Chinese medicine to see how they could help me. And so in terms of those systems of care, we still see that to this day, where older generations, my generation, where you're going to see a physician and you see your Western doctor and you tell them what's going on, but the Western doctor doesn't actually ask if you're doing any traditional medicine. Whereas when you go to an acupuncturist or a traditional Chinese practitioner, as I've done, they ask what Western medications I am doing to then complement their alternative medication. And so we really need to look at how to interpret back to that cultural understanding of access to care, and for our Western model to also incorporate those aspects to be inclusive.
Absolutely, so true. We need to have more of a holistic approach for the care systems. And just to add a little bit from the South Asian community perspective, because my research has been a lot with the South Asian community, especially working with caregivers, parents of children on the autism spectrum. So, what I hear is very similar to what you have been saying. For example, there are no words in Urdu language, to capture autism. So, the words they use translate into more like a mad person, a crazy person, insane person. So the participants I have worked with, the parents and caregivers, they have told me that they had, when they first got this diagnosis, they had little knowledge what it was about, and the way it was explained to them, there was so much medical jargon in the conversation and that they could not understand, and they had to study more material to understand what was going on. And one of them actually told me that there was no interpreter and they did not understand the language well enough, and that was the visit to tell about the diagnosis of autism. So you can imagine that the clinician telling something and parents not understanding what he's talking about in absence of an interpreter. So I think that is a quite a I don't know what to say, not a good treatment of families who are coming from diverse backgrounds, and they to be more inclusive and build their understanding. Already they experience a lot of stigma, lack of knowledge about disability. So that, similarly, I mean, there is a big delay. They were talking about, some parents telling they started at age of 3.5 years. And they contacted family physician, and by the time they went through different phases, the child was already 5 years old. So there was a long process to get the diagnosis of autism. For sure, stigma is playing a big role. Language issues, coordination, especially for complex disabilities like autism, which often comes with many other, sometimes 40% chance of having other comorbidities, other conditions like ADHD, learning disabilities, sometimes intellectual disabilities. It's a full spectrum. So the systems of care are very complex for autism. So understanding that is like, maybe doing a PhD. But the challenge for the caregivers is that they don't have that much time. They want to be advocates for their children right away, but the experts are not coordinating and not providing them the level of information they need. So I think that's really important to start where the families are, engage them, and address even their cultural barriers. So that was me, and I would encourage participants to keep writing your questions because in interest of time, I'll move to the second question, which is that, that we talked about several challenges among Asian Canadian communities, and they are all diverse, although there are some shared experiences which we heard about. But in your view, how some of those structural and cultural dimensions intersect for Asian, Canadian individuals and families living with disabilities, because their experiences might become even more challenging?
I can jump in here. The first thing that I thought of in terms of structural and cultural barriers was actually my parents. They're in their 70s, and so when we look at access to healthcare for older adults who are not who have English as a first language, we already know that's already quite difficult. And so then you add on the layer of the second language, then you still older adult, and then you add on technology. And so at this point in time, and especially with COVID-19, it's become the structure for them to access healthcare has become harder because of the reliance on technology, online forms, booking appointments, doing online sessions, and with and culturally as a child of immigrants, with my limited Cantonese, or as I call Chinglish, trying to culturally navigate that system for my parent when structurally it's moved into a way that is very exclusionary for most older adults. And then you add the additional layers of language and culture, it makes it even harder for them to access healthcare. So I kind of want to just, yeah, that was the first thing that I kind of thought of with this question.
COVID-19 and more technology and virtual parts. Yes, for sure. Vanessa, you want to add?
Yeah, and I'll just add to that and just say that what I've seen like in my work and in the research is that you really can't understand the barriers that people with disabilities face without looking at these intersections, without looking at race, culture, and language magnifies these barriers for certain communities, and how these overlapping identities shape how families navigate the system and influence what types of supports that they seek versus avoid. And all of this affects their ability to access services. And as Rabia mentioned, you also have to consider that people with disabilities are more likely to live in poverty and because they face higher living costs and things like that. So this just, again, magnifies the barriers that they face.
Yeah, absolutely. Any example come to your mind from your research, or how the challenges, if you want to share while you're thinking, maybe we can move to Elaine or Vanessa, you have some example?
Yeah, so just there's so many things. So the work that I do looks at this intersection of being a newcomer and also being from a racialized background. So I'm thinking, and I think you mentioned this too, what you were saying earlier is that a lot of these families, you almost need a PhD to figure out this system. It's so complicated, and they're dealing with other things aside from being a racialized person and from minorities, trying to get settled into a new country, trying to find employment, to support their families and things like that. Housing is another issue, especially here in Vancouver, where the cost of living is so high. Yeah, I think I'll stop there, but
Absolutely. I mean, the most of the facilities are in urban areas, and living closer to the facilities where the systems of care may exist is a big challenge because of the housing cost. Yeah. Yes, Elaine, you want to add something?
Sorry, Elaine speaking. I was muted for a moment. Yeah, this is really great. Thank you so much, Vanessa and Cindy, for so far. So I guess for me, I might stay with the context of education still for my response to this question. I think the cultural and structural dimensions of institutions of education overlap and intersect in ways that make them difficult to separate. I think, again, culturally in the Filipino community, and I know this isn't unique to the Filipino community, but I think especially after yesterday's panel that I was also had the privilege of moderating. I know this is also something shared across Asian communities, but in the community that I grew up in, notions of academic excellence and productivity are highly valued. I, for instance, was a very troublesome child. I was noisy, I was loud, I didn't follow rules. However, my learning style just happened to align well with what the institutional schooling system required of children, and I think still required of children to this day, right? So sitting still in a class at your desk, 9 to 3 p.m. days, worksheets, school events, socializing, and as long as I did well at these activities, I was forgiven. And this notion of forgiveness, I think, brings me to another piece that is important to mention, I think, in relation to disability and particularly the experience of disability within the Filipino community, but that piece is religion. The Philippines, as many know, was colonized by Spain and later by the United States, and Spain's colonial rule would spread Catholicism across the Philippines, so erasing local spiritual traditions and rituals. And so given that history, it feels important to mention how the dimension of colonialism, particularly in how it materialized in the advent of Catholicism in the history of the Philippine Islands, deeply impacts how disabled Filipinos still experience themselves. So there's stories of disability as a cross to bear, as a punishment, as a condition that maybe we might pray away. And these stories, which bear the weight of post-colonial Philippines, I mean, inevitably shape, I think, the unique experience that disabled Filipinos might experience in schooling and in other systems, as we're all touching on the complex systems of care. Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I would say that, remaining on the schooling side, that there have been so many stories shared with me by, families from South Asian background in Canadian context, which sometimes are are just very revealing because they look very much like discrimination, racism. I heard from a family very recently. I'm doing this research and it's just under data collection. And this family, is born in Canada, is of South Asian descent, and a child is born with some disability. And when the child goes to school, is having difficulty, is autistic, having difficulty to communicate, and and the teacher calls the mom who wears hijab and has brown color. So the teacher says the child has these difficulties, and they are going to do some assessments, but he would benefit from ESL classes. So it is just astonishing that the family speaks English as a first language because they are born here. The child is born in a family for whom English is first language. And just by looking at a parent wearing hijab and a brown skin, they are saying this child needs ESL and was kept in ESL for 8 months until the child's aunt, who works for organization working with the families having individuals with disabilities, finds out and then makes a big point and sets up meeting, and then they reverse the track. So just sometimes these judgmental attitudes, and so that is I think when we are talking about intersections, that's where we can see how race, and disability they just convoluted, and the system just did not pay attention to the detail around that. Yes, Cindy.
I just wanted to add to that even though I'm born and raised here, I was kept in English as a second language until I was in grade 7. And so, yeah, and so it's it was astounding actually how the race and the disability intersected. And then because I grew up in a relatively small town, and we were, you know, one of the few overall Asian families, it was like, okay, well, here's ESL for you, even though I was born here. There was also actually one other point I wanted to just to kind of quickly touch on was, I know we're talking a lot about newcomers and other immigrants. One thing that hasn't really been talked too much about are the children of immigrants, the second generation, who are often raised and there's the expectation that they would have mainstream/Western medical understanding of mental health and disability. However, often what they learn is a mix of what their parents have taught them from their home country, which is the limited language and stigma, or the judgment in that linguistic translation from English to whatever, to, you know, their native language, combined with the very limited mental health education that Canada offers. And then once we go out into the world, there's the expectation that, okay, well, if you're born here, you ought to know. And so there's a bit of a disconnect. And so like some of the stuff that I've worked on specifically with Asian men's mental health is that like Asian males don't seek help until it's critical, and often by that time it's too late. And so we see that influence of, you know, being Asian, having a disability, being male, and then all of that culminating because of those intersections. And there are not the appropriate services for second or third, or people who identify as Asian but are not the first generation.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it is so complex. I have also heard from communities very afraid of sharing the diagnosis, with other community members, because there has been some history of taking children away, CSA, uh, uh, based on false accusations. But the family obviously is disrupted when your children are taken away just on some misunderstandings. So then the community member starts to tell the parents and the people with disabilities, they don't share. There's a risk. The government will come and take away. So, I mean, there are those fears as well, some histories playing as well. So I think there are a lot of factors at play, not just the cultural aspects, which are important, but also the structures and the history of it, how it has impacted certain racialized minority communities. It stays in their mind, especially when the cultures are more story-based cultures. It is transmitted from one member to another member, and they get even more scared. And we know in those, the social support is a buffer for mental health. Normally we say you need a village to raise a child. And if a child has some disability and you are not able to engage with the village, the burden becomes very high on the family and the individuals. Yes, for sure. So I was gonna now open up dialogue, and here I would like to hear from you that what are some of the solutions to these things that we have been talking and sharing with each other. Some are structural, some are cultural, some dynamics. We talk, community level, structural system. How can we move forward? And
I can go first.
Yes, please.
That's okay. I think there's so much change that needs to happen. I think at the family level, it's so important that families know their rights. Under the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, every child with a disability has the right to attend school and to be fully included in their community. I hear so many examples of parents saying that they have to pick up their child from school in the middle of the day, when the parent has work or they're doing other things, just because there's not enough supports in the school. That's exclusion, and that's against, the child's rights. So that's one thing. And then, as you've mentioned before, and what's also Rabia has mentioned as well, at the family level, it's so important for families to find their community, to build their networks, connect with other parents, other peer support groups. And I recognize that this can be so incredibly hard for some people. I'm also very introverted, but this kind of social connection is so critical for your health and well-being as caregivers. But it also provides the practical benefit of learning from other parents that have gone through the system already. And it will help you navigate this very complicated system much better. Parents are an extremely knowledgeable and important resource. So yeah, I'll just stop there for now and then.
No, great points. Know your rights and get connected with the community. Yes, Cindy, you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm thinking from like a health service perspective in terms of having organizations relook at a lot of their knowledge translation, all of their marketing materials. So it's not necessarily just white, but often I see it's somebody who's Asian with the Chinese language pamphlet. We actually need somebody who is Asian on the English ones as well, and really looking at that diversity across all languages and all cultures, and not just really siloing a certain ethnicity with the language and then having those expectations. So on a service level, really, I think that's something that could be done. I also think we should be funding a lot more research because we can't have the answers without asking the questions first, specifically from Asian Canadians with disabilities, because there are not enough Asian Canadians with disabilities. I know that when I first started, I really, really wanted to have my doctoral committee be fully racialized and with, a supervisor with a disability. That did not happen. And that was really hard to find because of, the disclosure and the stigma amongst current faculty members of Asian descent or older. Like it's very difficult to find. And then yeah, so I think I'll just stop from there and let Elaine.
Yes, absolutely. So we need more changes on the system level. It should not be just limited to translation. It needs to be more, cultural safety, cultural sensitivity, presence of interpreters, and more funding for research with the racialized minority communities. Yes, Elaine.
Yeah, I mean, these are all Elaine speaking, all wonderful suggestions. So I'm just really adding on here, but I think one of the things we can do to sort of try and address the challenges that we've already discussed is continuing to learn from disabled people and people with disabilities. I mean, I think even listening to Rabia today at the beginning, there's just a plethora, just a wealth of knowledge and wisdom that we often just don't make enough space for when we think about disabled community. And so just really listening to children and youth in our communities, of course, in addition to parents and siblings and everyone in the community, and trying, and by listening, really trying not to impose our unquestioned beliefs onto them, but actually trying to listen to their concerns, the ways in which they learn, rather than the ways in which we want them to learn, and the things they actually enjoy doing rather than the things that we think they should be doing. And I think having more conversations like these
Yes.
and are really crucial, even just for the people participating in them. Like now knowing Vanessa, Cindy, and of course meeting you, Professor Farah. I mean, it's been really helpful even for me as an Asian disabled person. So I feel really happy for that as well.
Yes, yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I would just add that, we need to center the voices of the community disabled individuals, their caregivers and allies. Especially as Rabia was saying, there is something unexpected happening in our society these days. There are a lot of changes on the south of our border. We don't want to have any rippling effects. Were already lingering effects of the COVID-19. So we want to now even work together with a purpose and come together and raise our concerns so that we are not lost somewhere under these pressures that different governments, different institutions are experiencing, different types of pressures they are experiencing. Some are ideological pressures, some are fiscal pressures. So we don't want to be lost in those pressures. We need to be together, making that noise. And more research would definitely help. So I think I would now like to see if our attendees, our participants, have any comments, questions. We can open up the floor. Elena?
We do have a question
Mhm.
from one of our participants, Gina Kwan. And so the question is, as someone from an Asian background, I've noticed that some parents don't want to admit their kids might have ADHD because of cultural beliefs of stigma. How can we support those kids when their families don't acknowledge their diagnosis or avoid it seeking help?
Yes, very good question.
Thank you, Gina, for this question. And if I can add one other piece to that, because I personally also I have a kid, and then he goes to school. We have a lot of friends, and then we have friends who the teacher insists for assessment, but the parents don't want to do it as part of their culture because they don't want to put a label on their kid. Thanks,
Yes.
Gina. Okay, now I leave it to you.
Complex. Yeah. Please, anyone from the panel?
Yeah, Elaine. Oh, Cindy, go.
No, go ahead, Elaine.
Okay, are you sure? Because you seem
yeah,
like
yeah,
okay.
for
Okay,
sure.
Elaine speaking. I can answer this question as a teacher. So just very sort of specific orientation to the question that I'm coming from, or a perspective, I suppose. In my experience, this has happened many times. I've had students who, given my own experience with disability, but also my education on disability, I know even without a diagnosis, need support. And even regardless of, and of course, there's understanding the parent's decision to not seek out a diagnosis. It's not about trying to persuade parents, at least from I'm speaking as in my role as a teacher, but rather how do I support the student then, knowing what I know. And so I would actively try and either support the student outside of class. So during lunchtime, I would try to educate, try to get everyone, all my whole class, sorry, to understand disability from another perspective. When we do pairing with other students, I would pair particular students with that student who I know are a little more sensitive to that student's learning needs. And so I guess one way to answer that question is, if you're a parent, is to really, I think teachers are really crucial in terms of the kind of difference they can make in a student's life. So really trying to understand, okay, get to know the teacher, get to know the educator, their background, their perspective on disability. Are they caring, and how are they caring? Because of course, maybe in other ways they are, but that's sort of my initial response to that question. Yeah.
My initial response was to not use the word disability, ADHD, or any of those labels. I'm thinking about my experience and my parents having to navigate the school system with a disability. At the time, they did the best they could, but looking back on it, it would have been a lot more helpful to not use those stigmatizing terms and rather be like, this is how your child learns. This is what we're going to do to support your child. Because though the label of disorder, disability, or ADHD is really, really scary. And so thinking about how to have that conversation without using those terms, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah. I'll just briefly add to that because Elaine and Cindy did a really good job of covering this question, I think. But just to, start with a place of empathy and just validate that their fears, they're valid and they're common. Things that we don't know a lot about are often things that scare us the most. So like, what has already been said is just educating the parents on this is, your child has different learning needs and this is how they learn best. This diagnosis can be used as a first step to getting the supports that they need, kind of coming from that approach. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and I think to address the stigma around, especially because these conditions start to emerge in early years, developmental challenges. And so I think we need to do a lot more at the system level in preparing the teachers, because many of the times the communities I worked with, they were telling that they did not identify the signs of autism, autistic traits, because they were not aware of these developmental delays. They were first generation South Asian immigrants. These things are not sort of on radar for a developing country. They don't have the systems. So the parents were not aware what's happening. So the teachers were telling them that there is something that the child could benefit from further assessments. So I think the teachers are sort of a front line. Our primary care physicians are other, family physicians, but there's such a shortage. I don't think we will be ever be ready to rely on them. It will take decades. So teachers are really important. All the children are going there. How do we prepare them for very empathetic, open conversations, honest, so that families are engaged, and schools are the systems where families can have so much knowledge about developmental delays. What can happen when a child is growing. In many countries, before coming to Canada many decades ago, I was a family physician in Pakistan. I mean, at that time, there was no attention in medical school to developmental delays. So maybe they have changed over years, but I mean, we can do better in the school systems by engaging parents. And so much connection with the community are important. Carrie's Place, for example, here it was an organization that always tell parents to prepare a letter for the teachers. So the parent writes a letter on behalf of the child. If child is big enough, or they write their own letters that what do I need in accommodations? How do I learn? What are my strengths and what are my challenges? And for each subject, teacher, class teacher, they set up a separate meeting to discuss the learning needs of the child. So we can, if we can overcome stigma, there are strategies to make teachers your partners. Okay, we saw some other questions.
I like making your teacher as your partner. That's a nice way to end the question. Yeah, we do have a lot of questions. One is from Cindy Chen, and I think it's for Cindy. And the question is that is mental health issues be normalized in Asian families? And like parents,
Yeah.
they are just think that these individuals stressful, or everyone is the same.
From my research, specifically with like Asian males, no, it's not being normalized. It's actually just, it's not being talked about, because of the multiple intersections. Like being men, you don't show your emotions, you don't talk about your feelings, and then that relationship that you have with your parents, in terms of, you don't necessarily have a lovey lovey-dovey, open emotional relationship with your parents. And so I don't think it's being normalized. It's just starting to be talked about. But the stressor is actually more of the immigrant experience of like, okay, well, you're going through all of this because we come from an immigrant family. And so I think from what I have seen and what I've looked at, the normalization of like the disability is there because of the immigrant experience, and not necessarily normalized as everyday stressors. I hope that helped.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. And there is also another very interesting question from Lo Wang. They're asking, since all of our panelists are female and we're discussing the experience of Asian individuals with disability, I'm curious, from your perspective, are there particular challenges you face at the intersection of gender, disability, and cultural background? And this question is open to everybody, and maybe we can stay here for 1 more hour.
For sure. Yes, Elaine.
Okay, yeah, Elaine speaking. Yeah, I think this is a great question. And one of the things I didn't mention is that I mentioned this yesterday during the panel, but I also have a brother who is deaf and disabled. And even though we both experience disability, and I'm the youngest one. But however, because of I had mentioned earlier how my learning style was really fitted for the Western school system, and his learning style, not so much. I was sort of celebrated more than my sibling, one. And two, I was also very early on became a caretaker, sort of a caregiver to my family. I think when we first immigrated here, I was telling one of the panelists yesterday after our panel, because my parents or my dad didn't speak English, or he did speak English, but not as well, let's say, as I did. I already, maybe at 7, grocery clerks would look at me and say, "Can you tell your dad what I'm trying to say?" And I would say, "No, he can speak." I'm in grade 1, like he can speak English. But so early on, as a woman, as a girl, even with a disability, I was still expected to take care of everyone in my family, and so I mean, I think that's sort of my initial response to this question. And, add the layer of being Filipino. Filipino very much has a very, and in relationship to caregiving, the expectation is already, of course, you take care. That is in your culture, and so that's my response to that.
Exactly. That's what it is, because South Asian culture is also very collectivist culture. So there is a lot of family orientation, and there is also gender hierarchy there. There's an overall relationship hierarchy, but gender norms are very rigid. So mothers are already expected to do a lot more in terms of parenting. And when a child is diagnosed with disability, then instead of understanding that caregiving is not the same as parenting, these are two different things. Although the person you are caring is the same child, the whole family puts everything usually on the mom. That, okay, you are parent, you are mother, you also become the primary caregiver for the children with disabilities. So there is that gender dimension also going on, gender dimension for the caregivers, that who is a primary caregiver and how their mental health and their well-being goes down if they are not supported by the family. They are the only one doing a lot of emotional work for the child, because you love the child and you are handling so many providers and you are telling your story again and again to each provider. So it becomes emotional labor for them. And whether it is understood in the South Asian culture, I'm not sure. And then the on the side of individuals with disabilities, there is a gender thing going on, boys treated differently, and for girls, it takes longer to even get that diagnosis. And I see a lot of comments are coming here.
Yeah, we have a lot of comments from Fan Miaomeng, who is agreeing of what you were just talking about, like the issue that Chinese new immigrant family, when they have to take care of other members with disability, they often face challenges. Also from the government perspective, and I want to add a question which is related to this comment. So then, in a way, it seems that the law is there, and then each one has right, and then the law is very well written, apparently. But the implementation, it seems that is going towards a different directions. Maybe not all the time, but sometimes it seems that there is a gap between implementation and the law. That's at least the feeling that I have today after the panel, after listening to all these stories. So is that what's happening? And then if the so, why so? And what can be done to solve these? It's a $1,000 question. If anybody wants to reply, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll just say this. This doesn't answer the question at all, probably, because I think this is a big problem, is that there is this gap. But I just wanted to add that this is why representation is so important. It's not just about having diverse people on the front lines, service providers. It's representation at the policymaking level, where these decisions are being made. It's so important, this representation, that also that service providers, that they reflect the communities that they serve, because when this happens, the services and supports tend to be more respectful and relevant. And so yeah, so that doesn't answer your question. I don't know how to address this gap in what the laws are versus how they're implemented, but yeah.
Yeah, representation, excellent. Yeah.
Not that this really answers that either, but I just to tag on to that in terms of representation is to get to policies and laws, we need to show that these things are happening in Asian communities. And currently, for the most recent project I worked on, looked at social media and the experiences of being neurodivergent on social media from people who are neurodivergent. And there were very, very few Asian content creators that talked about their experiences of being neurodivergent. And so frequently, because I can 95% confident that almost everyone here does use some form of social media. And so really looking at who you're following, who you're seeing, because with that social movement, we can then have that's a hopefully snowball effect that can lead to implementation. So yeah, just really a lot of my work right now is focused on social media and how we can have those social movements. And so for everyone to start posting and sharing their experiences, there are many, many white neurodivergent experiences from white women on social media is what we found through our research. And I can remember maybe like the 5 East Asian content creators off the top of my head, because they were the only ones who were posting. So yeah, just wanted my 2 cents.
Eileen speaking. Just gonna hop on. It's sort of my answer. I think response is a bit of a fusion of Vanessa and Cynthia's, in the sense of, I think right away I think about, well, who is making the law? So who's writing the law? Who is the law serving? What notion of nation state to citizenship, ideas of the normal citizen is it upholding? I think are questions that we should ask in terms of the law. I think when we think about the law as one story, and then even what we've discussed today as another story, or having another story filled with many stories, we can begin to understand, just how perhaps linear or singular of a story the law can be, right? That's just sort of and we're back to, I think, Vanessa, you said at the beginning, that's like a linear, narrow understanding of disability. And I think sometimes when even if the words accessibility and inclusion are written in the text, that doesn't necessarily mean disabled people have been included either in making and writing the text, nor have they been thought about in the creation of that text. And so, I have a lot of, when I teach at University of Toronto, and a lot of my graduate students are often from China. And so what I ask them is, tell me your story of disability. And it's very similar, Professor Farah, to what you were saying about some of the families you've been talking with, and so how in their language they don't have a word for autism, and so we share about, okay, what about in our language? What stories do we have or do we not have? And what might that tell us about how we can think differently about disability, about inclusion, accessibility? So it's having more, and I think someone in the comments mentioned this, having more of these conversations. We're back to that, I think, fills some of that gap between the law and what it's trying to do, or so-called seeming to do, and also what is actually happening.
Yes, absolutely. And I would just like to add that, learning from allies, because they are disabled communities, and there's a big history in Canada how social movements have really changed the policy, changed the law, how families actually went to fight legal cases, so they were fighting for their rights when the charter came for, people with disabilities. And so first thing is know your rights. Then you can question that, whether it's working for me, or if it is not working, then, we need to challenge it. And challenging it means, coming together, working with several community members to change something. So I think a lot of responsibility falls on each one of us, so that's my just thinking, Lena.
Yeah, thanks, Farah. Yeah, it's actually 9:05, so we had to be respectful of the time. There were other questions. There is actually one very interesting question which is very related to the what we just talked, which is that how can we better integrate social resources such as government, communities, and care individuals to provide better assistance. I think that in a way, you all already replied, but if you just want to reply with one keyword that we can remember at the end of this session, please go ahead. Vanessa, do you want to start?
I might need some time to think about that one. That's tricky. It's one word. Does anyone else want to go?
This is a tough one.
Yeah.
Elaine speaking.
But you don't have to say just one word. I'm just saying like one sentence. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I have one sentence then.
Yeah,
I think I'm gonna make it a long sentence.
You make a long sentence.
I'm gonna
You
make a long
accept 20
sentence.
words. It's okay.
Yeah. I think one of the ways we can better integrate, resources for people in the communities we've mentioned is to ask, as again we've all mentioned already, ask disabled people and their families what resources have worked for them, what they have actually found helpful. So as a person living with deafness, I can, off the top of my head, I can think of two organizations, the Bob Rumble Center for the Deaf and Silent Voice. So if you're living with deafness or hard of hearing, or you have a loved one, I would recommend those two have been helpful for me and some people that I know. That was one long sentence.
Yeah, I think I am on the same, thinking that we need to bring the communities to the center, the people with lived experience, what works for them. That's how we should co-design. There's a lot of change needed at every level, whether it's school level, whether it is something to do with group homes or adult daycare programs, it's law. We need to co-design by bringing them to talk, empower them to come forward.
Thank you, Farah. Thank you, everybody, for this wonderful panel. So I know that there are other people who would like to ask questions, but because of it's already getting late. I want to mention to everybody that if you still have questions or want to know or you want to discuss with any of our panelists, please feel free to connect with the North Star Special Needs Society. I'm putting the website, the webpage here on the chat. Take time to copy and paste if you can, and where there are contact information, so connect with them, and then they will help to coordinate the questions that you have. So now that we ended this wonderful conversation, and then I feel so satisfied because I learned so much. And then I think that everyone was saying before that it's so important to organize this event where we discuss, we share stories, we listen, we really push our mindset to start to think in different ways. And these are very important initiatives. So I want to thank North Star Special Needs Society for allowing us to organize these. We'll be here tomorrow night again at 7 o'clock for a panel focused on employment. I sound like a TV show right now. But I would like to finish this this conversation with a poll, because you remember that at the beginning we had a poll and then we asked you a few questions like how much did you know about this topic from 0 to 5. So now that you spent 2 hours with us, then we're going to re-ask you the similar questions. How much are you familiar with this topic? So Gina is going to launch the poll in a second, and feel free to reply. We have 2 questions. So how much did the session help you understand the Accessible Canada Act and its impact on Asian Canadian communities that Rabia talked about? Okay, I'm very happy to see that we're getting a lot of 5s. So in a few 4, few 3, a few 2. So I hope that everybody enjoyed it and learned a little bit more. Take your time to reply. We have a lot of people in the panel today. And the second question is, how much did the panel improve your understanding of the structural and cultural challenges faced by Asian Canadians with disabilities? All right. Okay, we can leave the poll open a little bit if people want to reply. And having said that, I think that I'm going to wish everybody a wonderful evening or afternoon, depends on which part of Canada you are, or good night if you're on the east side. And thanks again for your time and for sharing your stories. That was very magical and powerful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
And I'll see you tomorrow night.
Yes.
Yeah, bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.